When it comes to specifically halal investing, there's not specific guidelines in the Quran and Hadith that sort of stipulate what makes investment halal.
The crypto space is still quite nascent. We're still quite young when you compare us to, traditional financial systems that have been around for centuries, if you will, and, developed. But it has its own intricacies and uniqueness, which is very exciting.
But my personal opinion is that they're not halal to invest in. I mean, there's no real utility behind meme coins. They're essentially a joke, and that's literally what they are. Both from an Islamic point of view, but even from a financial point of view. Hey, you can be a really good Muslim and be wealthy. Money is just a tool, to allow us freedom, to allow us to do things, whether it's giving back to the community, supporting our families.
It's important, again, commendations to you, Brother Muhammad, for doing the work that you do to educate our brothers and sisters across the globe and improve our knowledge so we can obviously go into this new world in a different way.
That Muslims find it difficult to trust these new technologies, these new spaces. We have to not just give up. Instead, we have to kind of look into these industries, look into these technologies and see first if it's halal, and if it's not, what can we do?
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome one and all to another very special episode of HAQQ Community Podcast, the Community Talks, if you will. We have a very special guest today, Brother Muhammed Lamabt from Muslim Investing. Salam, Muhammad. How are you doing? You okay?
Salam, I'm good, alhamdulillah. How are you?
Yes, shukran. I can't complain. Today we're going to delve into the world of halal investing and how it works and how you can feel comfortable with it, because that's the USP and the goal of HAQQ Network, is to bring you in and give you that comfort and that trust that when you're in this environment that you are comfortable with what you're dealing with. And our brother Muhammad is a very learned individual in this field, and he'll be able to give us sort of the overview in the broader context, perhaps not specifically with HAQQ Network and ISLM, and we can talk about that in our own time on our social platforms, whether that's Discord, Telegram, X, or otherwise. Obviously, you're all welcome to DM me as well. And I'm sure Brother Muhammad will be getting many DMs after this as well from many people saying, what's going on? Brilliant. So let's move on to sort of just a cursory introduction, Muhammad, if you don't mind, into yourself, what you do, Muslim investing, just so we can sort of get a flavor of what you do.
Sure. So, Muhammad, I run an organization called Muslim Investing, where I teach people about halal investing and Islamic finance. And I've been doing that over the past 5 years, largely through social media, creating short bite-sized content where I break down myths, teach people how to invest, what makes an investment halal, and sort of how to navigate that whole industry, which I think a lot of people are not super familiar with. And there's a lot of misconceptions there. And my goal is to make it easier for Muslims to invest and grow their wealth, in a halal way.
Super duper. I think there's two things that you said there, which I found very interesting. One, obviously, short bite-sized versions. Because it's true, when I'm flicking through on my Instagram or my X or wherever it is, if I see like a 5-minute video clip, I'm a bit like, yeah, okay, let's move on. But if you get those like little, 10, 20, 30 seconds, it really just engages you in a different way, doesn't it? I think the other thing that you say, and I think it's very important, the work that you do, is you talk about combating these myths that exist in certain circles and certain areas. I think there was a myth, whether it was myth or relevant at the time, obviously that's a question for the scholars, but there was this idea, wasn't there, quite prevalent of about 10 years ago that, crypto, everything to do with crypto is haram, full stop. There's just a blanket ban on everything. If you touch it, sort of bad stuff will happen and stuff. So it's good that obviously, people like yourself are out there educating our brothers and sisters, and me, of course. I'm sure I learned many things during this space as well. So what I'd like to do initially after the sort of opening is just discuss as you say, the halal investing, sort of the 101 aspect, quote unquote. So how to grow wealth while staying true to your faith, because I think that's critical for pretty much everybody, within the Islamic faith. We all want to grow ourselves, our wealth, for the benefit of our family, for the benefit of ourselves, etc. But the question is, how do we do that within the precepts of our deen? And I guess if you could talk a little on the Islamic principles that go into, Islamic finance, and what key things our brothers and sisters should keep an eye out for.
For sure. When it comes to Islamic finance, I think the one thing most people are familiar with is that we don't deal with riba, which is interest. And that's obviously a big part of Islamic finance. A few other aspects are, not getting ourselves into excessive speculation. So gambling, essentially making investments into things that there's no due diligence, no research. It's sort of just taking a risk and hoping for the best. Those sort of investments are not encouraged and not part of Islamic finance principles. And that's sort of the main structure of what we do in terms of Islamic finance principles. When it comes to specifically halal investing, there's not specific guidelines in the Quran and Hadith that sort of stipulate what makes investment halal. And in modern day, scholars have sort of recognized this as an issue and have dived deep into the industries. And that's why you said, like 10 years ago, the crypto industry wasn't sort of like a blanket rule saying it was all haram. It's because scholars were not super familiar with the space. And I think a lot more people have got familiar with that now. Scholars have researched into it and have come up with a set of criteria that allow Muslims to sort of navigate that space. And that's sort of taken us from looking at the original Islamic finance principles like avoiding riba, avoiding interest, and taken us to today where we can now invest in crypto, in stocks, in a way that's in line with Islamic principles.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I just think, you hear it now, don't you? Like every week or every couple of weeks or something, there's a scholar or a unitary body somewhere that releases a fatwa that says, such a product is halal or such a product is acceptable within sort of providing it's used in a specific way, etc. Shukran alhamdulillah, we're blessed with two fatwas from the Kenyan council and the Indonesian councils declaring the network compatible with Islamic rules and the Sharia principles. Same with ISLM, I believe. I mean, they're readily available online. We received one from a group of very learned individuals, which you can see on the HAQQ website as well, about 3 years ago, I think. Was it 2022, 2023? So quite right. I mean, I think times are changing, and that's not to say faith is changing. I think understanding is changing. So people's understanding of what is crypto, what is a distributed ledger technology, what
For sure.
all
I mean, these technologies went around, right? So
yeah,
exactly.
exactly. And I think it's important. Like I don't know how you feel about this, but from my perspective, it's very important to take an opinion from scholars, absolutely, but scholars who understand the area as well, because there's some scholars. I'm sure you've seen it as well, where you'll go to some scholars who just don't know it, and out of protection and out of what's the principle? Sorry, like where you say, I'm just going to be safe, I'm just going to
Yes.
avoid it. With a shackle,
Exactly, yeah.
with doubt, absolutely. With doubt, just avoid it. It's the simplest way. So it's very important to go to scholars with the particular knowledge. But as you say, as we become more ingrained in society, I think more people will. So there's a very particular topic I want to ask you about. And I think it's got a lot of attention in the media. It's not something I'm particularly very comfortable with. And it's meme coins. So I'd love to take your opinion on like what you think about meme coins. And obviously this is, once again, just to confirm, this is like a non-financial advice basis. Please, everyone, do your own research, etc. We're just discussing more sort of the spiritual and the broader elements of it. But in terms of meme coins, what's your thoughts on that? Sorry.
For sure. And again, I'm not an Islamic finance scholar by any means. But my personal opinion is that they're not halal to invest in. I mean, there's no real utility behind meme coins. They're essentially a joke, and that's literally what they are. Both from an Islamic point of view, but even from a financial point of view. We've seen certain meme coins rise in value over a very short period and then tank straight away. So like they're not good investments. I would not recommend getting into them. Focus on, tokens, if you're looking in the crypto space, that have strong utility, avoid interest. So my opinion on meme coins is hard no.
Well, you know what? I'm glad you said that, because it'd been quite awkward if we went the other way. But no, I agree. I mean, again, obviously, absolutely not financial or some advice basis, but just from my perspective, my understanding, they terrify me. It's like you said, you put $100 in overnight, it could be $1 million, and then the next day it's like 50, and it's just
For sure. Like in transparency, I invested in Dogecoin like way before I knew about Islamic finance principles, and I saw that rise. But then like one tweet from Elon Musk, and you see the power of the entire market change, then price completely changed just because someone tweeted something, not because there's any real change in the value of the actual token. So
yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. But moving back to sort of, I think this gives us a natural segue into the next question I have, more sort of on the agenda basis, and it's about misconceptions within sort of the Islamic finance space, and particularly obviously with crypto space, because obviously that's the purpose of this. But what misconceptions are you aware of? And how hard is it to debunk them in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, when it comes to investing in general, they feel it's all haram, like the entire industry. So they don't get themselves involved because the whole financial ecosystem is riba based. Therefore, stocks are haram. Therefore, I can't invest. And like also another big one is you can't be a rich Muslim. You can't be a good Muslim and a rich Muslim. Like those are two completely separate entities. And people struggle with the fact that reality is, if you look back at the Sahaba, there were plenty of really wealthy scholars, and those Sahaba sort of what do you call it? They spread the deen, and because of that wealth, they were able to afford the things they were able to afford to, and go out and give da'wah to people. That is a massive one that I get, and it's sometimes really difficult to break that down and be like, hey, you can be a really good Muslim and be wealthy. They're not. Money is just a tool. I mean, to allow us freedom, to allow us to do things, whether it's giving back to the community, supporting our families. It's not just about buying the latest Lamborghini and showing off. That's not the entire purpose of money. And I think that's a massive one that like I'm constantly breaking down. And even when it comes to investing, it's like, hey, you can invest. There are ways to invest. There are criteria set out that we can literally follow to invest. And so long as we're within those parameters, we've done the research, we know what we're getting ourselves into, like it can be done.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it was Allah Hazrat Rahmatullah who wrote this beautiful passage that said something along the lines of, when the money lives in your hand and not your heart, it doesn't matter how much money you have in your hand. When the money lives in your heart and not your hand, it doesn't matter how little you have, it will corrupt you. And I paraphrase that in terms of corruption, but I imagine the purpose is if your life is dominated by the money, it doesn't matter if you have a small amount or a large amount. It's problematic. So yeah, absolutely right. I think I struggle with the two things you just referenced there. So before I came to Hack Network and Islamic Coin, I assumed incorrectly, of course, that all crypto haram. It just is blanket ban. And I assumed in terms of having wealth beyond what is necessary was also an issue, as you rightly say. And it's important that this message comes out that actually it's not entirely like that. There are other things. I don't know where these ideas came from, whether it was through cultural norms or whether that's through yeah, or societal changes or whatever it is. It's important. Again, commendations to you, Brother Muhammad, for doing the work that you do to educate our brothers and sisters across the globe, and improve our knowledge so we can obviously go into this new world in a different way. I think something that is worth talking about is how blockchain technology and how crypto impacts sort of the financial landscape. Now, I'm not talking here specifically about ISLM and HAQQ. I'm just talking more broadly, just in terms of crypto and the blockchains themselves. I mean, how do you feel they resonate with the Islamic finance sort of sphere?
I think, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, like one belief is that the financial system is corrupt with riba, which in a sense is. I mean, the fiat system is riba based, and that is a fact. Scholars have given a way to navigate that. However, it still is riba based. Ultimately, that's what it is. Whereas the crypto space, there's a lot more transparency. The fact that it's decentralized, it's not controlled by one central organization, allows for, I would say, a closer to the ideal Islamic financial ecosystem. And I think that's where the blockchain, the crypto space allows us, an ability to sort of invest in that space that's more aligned with our faith. That's my sort of stance and belief when it comes to the blockchain crypto space. And the technology as well itself is super advanced and a lot more reliable compared to the fiat system.
I love the way you put that, because that illustrates a point that I make to people all the time. Scholars have found a way to navigate the system out of, essentially, it's a necessity. This is how the universe works. Well, the world works anyway, and you need to find a way to provide your family, etc. But by saying that, you're automatically accepting that this is an exception to the rule. It's not the norm. So where there are frailties and issues in the fiat system, you're using it out of exception, not because it's permissible, not because it's halal or anything. It's because there's an exception that allows you to do it. And when you have a system, when you have a function that perhaps can eradicate that, I think it's worth considering that at the very least, to see how that works. And as you rightly say, the crypto space is still quite nascent. We're still quite young when you compare us to, traditional financial systems that have been around for centuries, if you will, and, developed. But it has its own intricacies and uniqueness, which is very exciting. And again, not financial advice, not legal advice, etc., etc. Please do your own research. But I do think it's interesting to have a look at, just to try and understand it from an academic perspective, if nothing else. And I think, just pivoting slightly to HAQQ Network and ISLM, I mentioned there was various fatwas that have proved the permissibility of these products within the auspices of what was investigated, of course. But just to top it off, products that are launched on HAQQ Network, generally, they have a fatwa. So our native gold-backed stablecoin received a fatwa. The Firoza Finance platform, the credit liquidity platform, received a fatwa. The Barakafy, which is our repurchasing platform, received a fatwa of compliance. All these products received fatwas of compliance before they were launched on a chain, because we wanted to make sure that actually these do comply with the principles of Islam and the Sharia. And we want to make sure that anybody who comes and uses this platform, they feel comfortable. I think, one of the big things is trust. It's that trust that you believe the person who's speaking to you and you believe the product that's being delivered. From your perspective, Muhammad, have you found that trust is critical in this sphere?
Oh, definitely. And that's what I'm trying to do with Muslim investing, is become a trusted voice in the space. From the research I've done, to provide information to people, and correct information if possible. And if there has been any mistakes, I'll try and correct that if there are any. I think Muslims find it difficult to trust these new technologies, these new spaces, because they're not, like you said, if in doubt, they kind of avoid. But that is true to an extent. But I think in order for us Muslims to get ahead, we have to not just give up. Instead, we have to kind of look into these industries, look into these technologies, and see first if it's halal, and if it's not, what can we do? What is there that's halal that we can get ourselves into to keep up with the times, so that we can advance as an ummah. Otherwise, we're just going to be left behind, and that's not what we want to do.
Absolutely. This is a slight segue from what we're talking about again, but I remember when iPhones came out and, touchscreen, everyone looked at it and said, oh, what's that? It's a novelty. Why doesn't it have a keypad, etc.? And I remember some friends and family members who said, it's a fad. It'll pass. It's not going to stick. We need the old, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the keyboard and everything. And, lo and behold, it must be 10, 15 years later or something like that now. Exactly, isn't it? The universe has just changed. Everything has changed. To the point where, people are using, laptops that are touchscreen, like the Surface Pros and whatever else. So it's interesting. I just think it's very interesting how.
Yeah, exactly. So like you mentioned, the technologies will advance regardless of whether or not we look into them. And we're just going to be the ones that are sort of left behind if we don't find a way to navigate those technologies.
And I think it's important to remember that, Islam is not a harsh religion in terms of obligation. It says, yes, do things correctly, do things in a halal manner, and there are rules to protect, but those rules are there to protect you as an individual. And as I think, from my understanding, and forgive me, it will be nowhere near as good as yours, but from my understanding, the Sharia principles and the fiqh principles around finance essentially revolve around this community spirit, to make sure that we're all pulling in the same direction, we're protected together as a group, rather than incentivizing. Let's just say, I'm not going to get into any particular commentary here, but let's just say there's a company who had loads of money and they decided they wanted to lend it, but they wanted to turn that into a zero-sum game so they could take control of your asset and charge you a lot of money, 2 to 3 times the value of said asset, so you could potentially keep that for yourself and your family. I think that's, in some definitions, one might say that's predatory, others might not. But I think, this concept of, we're in it together, murabaha, mudaraba, ijara, all these principles, when you look into them, it's about risk sharing, it's about helping each other, it's about doing it together. So that was very interesting. Now, I'm going to go on to something which I'm sure you get asked a lot. And I find it very interesting. It's probably the $100 million question, crypto versus stocks, property against shares and crypto and stuff. It's a diverse investment. As a word, is very diverse. It'd be interesting to get your take on each individual asset class.
Yeah, for sure. If I'll be honest, if there's someone's entirely new to investing, and they don't have any knowledge on crypto, crypto is probably not the first investment I would talk about with them. I would probably, because stocks are a lot easier to understand, I think, comparing the two. If you're investing in a company, and you likely, you can invest in companies that you understand and know. But then the next step would be sort of looking into crypto, understanding it first before you get yourself invested into it. But it's important to do that. In terms of comparing the two, stocks, if you're investing in things like ETFs, probably a lot more diversified, less risky than crypto, but then at the same time, higher risk, higher potential to earn more. That's what I say as well, obviously with crypto investments. And then also it comes down to which sort of crypto investment you're investing in, because it's difficult to sort of put them all into one sort of bracket. When comparing stocks, ETFs, crypto, property, obviously stable, been around for years, but a lot harder to get into. There are property crowdfunding platforms out there, but the reality is it's a lot harder to break into property than it is stocks or crypto. And another thing with stocks and crypto, I think crypto is a bit of a learning curve when it comes to investing in crypto. And that's something also I'm trying to help Muslims sort of navigate as well. That's another difference between the two, I would say.
I think, like you said, with crypto in particular, I find that, the friction that exists in TradFi in terms of, I have to fill this form out, I have to go to this regulator entity, I have to do this, I have to provide this, doesn't really exist. I mean, let's face it, you go, with crypto, like, some exchanges don't even need KYC. You just turn up, create your account, load it up with something, 30 seconds, 1 minute, you're into an asset. Within 30 seconds, you're out of the asset. So I agree with you. The risk, there is a lot, there seems to be a bit of risk with it. But as you say, obviously, it's the reward, which is the other aspect. And I think fundamentally, education is a very important part.
For sure. With all investments, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like with HAQQ Network, we have something called the HAQQ Academy, which is focusing on sort of just so you can understand the basic blocks. I mean, there's no way you'll be able to explain everything everywhere in the crypto space or in any space. It's impossible, but sort of the foundational aspects, like what is a proof of stake system? What is the HAQQ Network? How do we operate within the Ethereum and the Cosmos environments? All these things, we try to obviously put these little educational seminars out there so people can understand it without sort of giving any specific financial advice. I think there's different ways of building wealth, isn't there? There's long-term and short-term strategies. Are there any sort of key criteria or key thoughts that you'd have in mind when considering whether a long-term or short-term strategy is appropriate for an individual?
As I tell, people when I'm talking about investing, is having an investment plan, setting financial goals. Those sort of determine what kind of strategies you use when it comes to investing. So if you've got a short-term goal of, say 1 year, 2 years, you want to be investing in less risky assets because you have less time to recover. Whereas if you've got a longer term goal, longer time horizon, then you can afford to take risky investments because you have time for the asset to drop in value, but then also increase in value. You have that, and age plays a role in that as well when it comes to investing. Younger people should be ideally investing in riskier things if they're looking at keeping that money invested for a while and make use of that time and that compounding for it to grow. And that's sort of the difference in terms of strategies between, a short-term versus a long-term sort of goal.
Well, that's very interesting. That, I mean, oddly enough, I didn't think of it like that, but you're right. There's loads of different points of consideration, isn't there? I think that's quite deep to think about. But just again, pivoting towards sort of the crypto space, in particular with regards to Muslim investors, do you think there's any particular appeal that the crypto space has to Muslims generally? We've obviously already spoken about sort of the we're all in it together type thing, but is there any other aspects, do you think?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the crypto space. I think obviously we mentioned transparency and the fact that it's decentralized, but also access. I think access is a big important factor because, for example, if you're in the West and you're looking at stocks, you may have access to US stock, for example, which is like the biggest stock market out of all the stock markets. But if you're in a place like in Southeast Asia or in Africa, you may not have access to those stock markets, whereas you'll likely be able to have access to crypto. And, we can see that with certain countries where they're using that because their currency isn't so stable or so reliable. They're using cryptocurrency for them to, do normal things, to spend on normal things, to purchase things, to save, that sort of thing. I think that's where crypto really sets itself apart when it comes to other investments.
Absolutely. I mean, you can see, as you rightly point out, various countries across Asia and Africa where for various reasons, inflation or otherwise, they're starting to adopt a different process and starting to adopt crypto essentially as this store of value, as security, which and then obviously that store of value then becomes a mode of trade, etc. So that it is interesting to see how the universe changes on that front. I think like one of the things that like strikes me is one of our USPs was always sort of helping the people who otherwise sort of cut off from financial services essentially, and as you rightly say, sort of in the West, and in certain developed countries, quote unquote, access to financial infrastructures, access to financial facilities and instruments are just quite easy. I could walk into town right now and quite easily pick up a product of whatever type I want, take money out of my bank account, put it in. I can pick it. I can do it on my phone, quite frankly. Walk up to the post office. There's this infrastructure that's already been built. Whereas I suppose in certain countries, obviously, that might not be that far ahead. Which is like one of the things that we've built and deployed is Project Atlas. And Atlas is essentially, you can go online with limited KYC. You can get up to 1,000 USD on a Visa or a MasterCard, and that will give you access to just any merchant that accepts Visa or any merchant that accepts MasterCard will accept that redemption. And by using ISLM, you lock it up into that card. The card goes, you make the payments and it's denominated in USD value. There are certain terms and conditions which obviously you must read. Obviously currency transfer if you're doing activity in non-USD value, whatever else. So please do your own research if you do have a look at it. But as you rightly say, there's this sort of encompassing others as well, isn't there? Now, this is an area where I have to say I'm definitely not an expert, so it'd be very interesting to sort of get your point of view on this. In terms of investment, as I said, it's such a broad sphere, and there's various ways of obtaining passive income, not just obviously capital appreciation, but passive income itself. So there are options like sukuk, dividends, staking, etc. What are your thoughts on sort of like sukuk? Let's just take that for example, and dividends from a Sharia perspective. Do you think they're okay? Do you think they're permissible? Do you think they're good ideas for, say, somebody who's our age, I guess?
Yeah, sukuk, from an Islamic point of view, sukuk dividends are fine. Sukuk, obviously, if you're not familiar with, are the Islamic alternative to bonds. Bonds are interest paid, whereas sukuk are asset backed, and you receive a portion of the profits. And dividends, if you're looking at halal stocks, then dividends can be halal. From an investment point of view, sukuk, I find that you need to have a significant amount invested in sukuk in order to sort of see a difference. And similar with dividends to an extent, they are great options for passive income. But in order to, I think a lot of people have the misunderstanding that they want to live off passive income and they think dividends is the answer, or sukuk. Reality is you need a lot of money invested in a stock, or a lot of money invested in sukuk in order to receive passive income that you can live off. Comparing that with staking, it varies a lot more in terms of the kind of percentage profit that you receive. What do you call it? It's a lot more doable, I think, with less to live in terms of passive income as opposed to sukuk and dividends. But from a halal point of view, so long as with staking the token itself is Sharia compliant, you're not earning interest, dividends if the stock's halal, and if you're investing in sukuk, I believe they all are halal in that sense.
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant. I think that's a very interesting way of putting it, comparing the sukuk aspect with the staking aspect. Obviously, with staking, not the issue, but the thing is obviously you're getting the token, aren't you? And then it's down to where the token is in the market environment. And then you have this sort of broad. I know some tokens which they used to offer like 100% per annum, in terms of returns, and there's some, but we have a fixed rate of 3% at the moment because we just find that in terms of what we want to do and the options we provide, there are other options within the ecosystem. So it is obviously quite rightly, as you say, such a broad space and a broad sphere. I've got to say, I'm sort of like a Web3 enthusiast. I'm HAQQ Maxi, Islam Maxi. I have been for a few years now because of the vision and what we're trying to achieve here. And I have to say, I quite enjoy obviously staking as a function. But one of my issues, I'm going to be honest with you, is accessing Sharia compliant financial products where I'm from in the UK, exceedingly difficult. It just is. I have to. It's not as easy as like if I wanted to go to the bank or I wanted to go to a financial advisor around the corner, they'd be able to offer me a myriad of products, none of which would be halal, and that's just the way it is. Um, but to actually find like a party who would be able to help me arrange a financial instrument that is Sharia compliant is much more difficult. I imagine it's different in different parts of the world, but I think that's one of the great powers of blockchain and Web3. I could be sat here in the UK, somebody else could be sat somewhere in South Asia, and through the magic of distributed ledger technology, we could arrange a HAQQ-based transaction, obviously with the intervening party who would obviously issue the certificate, etc. But I think this is something that, not to give any spoilers, but I don't really think it is a spoiler. I think it's well documented that this is something that we are very much looking at, researching how we can provide this to our brothers and sisters. But yeah, it's definitely something that has some interesting aspects to it.
For sure.
I think with
like I live in New Zealand, and it's a Western country. You'd think I'd have easy access as well, but it's very similar here with Islamic finance products, and the lack of and finding anything is very difficult. And like I look at other countries, and I'm like, it's a lot easier for a lot of other people to invest in halal products, whereas I'm sat here with not many options. And just like you mentioned, crypto is one of those options that no matter where you are, it's fairly similar in terms of the access point of view. The barriers to entry are fairly similar no matter where you are. Whereas other products, it really depends where you live and what passport you have or what proof of residence you have. That sort of thing really makes a difference.
Yeah, I'm exactly right. Absolutely right. And I think one of the things that I found, and I think this puts a lot of brothers and sisters off, when you try to obtain, say, for example, a halal mortgage. It's not really a mortgage, but obviously this flat, let's call it halal financing to purchase a house. The interest, not the interest rates, but the repayment, the repayment rate to the company are prohibitive. They are so insanely high that it basically prices 9 out of 10 people out of the market by default. Just because there's just such a lack of liquidity, because there's not that many people who are trying to access it, aware of it. I don't know what the correct phraseology is in terms of that, but there clearly is a liquidity issue there, and they openly say that, look, we're a small vendor. We essentially don't have access to oodles of money like a traditional bank. Therefore, we have to charge the rates that we charge. Therefore, we can provide the service that we service, which is fine. But I think sort of the crypto space, as we're saying, because it's such a broad and open space, and the activity on it, there is a very low bar when it comes to actually activating yourself within this crypto space. I think we have the power to perhaps change the dynamic on that a little more and make halal products more sort of ingrained in the normal space. I found, I'm not going to say specifically what, but I found something interesting that in certain countries where you'd expect halal products to be the norm, they're actually not necessarily the norm. And you do have to actually research this to try and understand, is it halal, is it not? Which I found very surprising. I'm obviously not going to name names because,
now I'm curious.
But I found that interesting. I think it brings it back to this concept of, it's incumbent on us all as adults, as responsible individuals, as Muslims, to do our own research on all the financial products that we invest in, that we use, to ensure that they are Islamically compliant, because we are sort of the final arbiters of our actions. Particularly if there are options out there that you can use to that effect. But then just in terms of like strategies, what general strategy would you say? Like, let's just say, Muhammad, someone comes to you with an opportunity. What are you looking at? What's your like top 3 that you're looking at to say, is this halal or is this haram? What's the first thing that a person should think about?
Well, the first thing to look at is whether there's any interest involved, I think, and how that looks like. How are they able to pay you that profit or that return? Where is it coming from? What are they investing in to give you those returns? And that's sort of what I look at when it comes to deciding whether or not an investment is halal.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I think again, it's a concept. I think sometimes that can be very hard and very nuanced, which is why it's important to speak to somebody. If you're not sure, speak to somebody who has the knowledge, who has the sort of the thought process to be able to do it, because we're all here to sort of help each other within, obviously, respecting each other's time as well, and the preciousness of it. But it's important to sort of understand that as well. I'd like to talk a little more about, in terms of the asset classes and growing wealth in tough markets. I mean, we have come through a particularly tough time, and one day I'm sure again a tough time will arise. And if you look at the horizon, perhaps not too far in the future. But in terms of from a market perspective, if you as a Muslim investor, what would you say is the primary thing to think about in a bear market, quote unquote?
I see. The way I look at it when it comes to investing is I'm a long-term investor. So when there is market downs or recessions or that sort of thing, I look at it as a discount on investments, to be fair. Because I'm buying, I use a strategy I use is the dollar cost averaging strategy, where I buy the same investments no matter what the price, monthly. So when the market's down, it just means I'm getting more of the same investment at a lower cost, which is how I look at it. But when it comes to looking at the markets and when they're down, it's, I think, having the cash ready or the money ready to buy in when the prices are low. So long as your horizon or your investment like timeline is past that point, like if you're looking at a long-term investment, having the money ready to buy investments when there is a low, I think is a great way of looking at it. If you've got a shorter time horizon, it can be very different. But for long-term investments, that's sort of the way I look at it.
Well, that's brilliant. I think something that's very important as well, based on what you're saying, and I'd be curious to hear what you say. I suspect, based on some of the things that you've said in this conversation, it might not be exactly what I thought initially. But in a period of particular financial instability, what's your thought process? What's your go-to? Real estate, gold, crypto? What would be your sort of, oh, I'm interested in looking at that at this stage?
So if we're going to look at investments in terms of like stability, I think gold is probably a solid one, right? Well, the way I look at gold is it's not really to grow my wealth; it's more so to maintain the wealth I do have. And I think gold typically withstands recessions and times where the market's down. And it's good to have. And even in my personal investment portfolio, I have some gold in it, and so to sort of manage the risk when it comes to that. And that's sort of my stance on the investment that I would probably go to when things are low, and then having the cash ready to buy all the other ones, when I can afford them. If you're looking at long-term investments, but gold is probably the one, that sort of withstands that. It's a hedge against inflation, as they say, right?
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. I was actually thinking that, so I'm glad you said that. But and obviously that bodes well again in terms of, as I said, we have a gold-backed stablecoin and HAQQ network, which is backed 1 gram for 1 gram. I mean, each deen is worth 1 gram of gold. That 1 gram of gold is, you can check, you can verify it. It's in the Brinks vaults in Dubai, and obviously, and it's also, you could ask for it to be sent to you. Obviously, packet, depending on where you are, the delivery costs will vary. So that's one of the things that I'm actually quite excited to see how Dean plays out, in terms of when on a downturn cycle, because we are integrating it with our products, with Feroza, with Barakah, etc. And yeah, it will be interesting to see how that goes. I think one of the things, like, again, not financial advice, this isn't financial advice, please don't take it as such, but one of the things that obviously comes to mind is zakat has to be paid. There is no two ways about it. It's a fundamental pillar. You have gold, zakat is payable, and that's subject to obviously overcoming the nisab amount. And one thing that I'm really excited about is, there's a way to obviously have ownership of gold. Pay the zakat, but you can liquidity pool it. You can obviously provide liquidity on Feroza. You can provide liquidity on Barakah, which that 2.5%, you could in a way mitigate that and potentially use it. I mean, it's just a thought. I mean, again, not financial advice. It's just something that I thought of an interesting way of looking at it.
True, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking more of obviously the angle if you've got enough money to live, but if it's a case where you need the money, gold is obviously very useful. And like you said, the ability to use that for liquidity and things like that really helps like income in the meantime while things are not so great.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. I think that's something that's very powerful and very interesting about the Web3 space. It's not something that we've fully explored yet, and I'm very excited to see what the next decade holds in terms of where do we go from here. What does this actually become? Is it just going to become essentially, digital money, or is it going to be something that people use in different ways to sort of modernize? The fourth great industrial revolution, for example. Is this going to be the fourth great industrial revolution? Only time will tell, really. In terms of what you see going forwards, what sort of opportunities or things do you see on the horizon that would help a Muslim, say, in this space? And I say that in the general investing space, not specifically. Obviously, it would be good if it was the crypto space, but obviously, generally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there are certain industries that are currently trending or are developing quite fast, like the AI space. Obviously, there's a lot of news and a lot of tension with AI, with the AI industry. You've got the EV industry, another one that a lot of people have been talking about. And I think, yeah, I mean, looking at those industries, there are certain aspects, definitely AI, that I can see that will be around and that will be very useful and will be a growing industry going forward. And that's something I'm looking at myself when it comes to investments, seeing what sort of stocks and what crypto investments, what investments in general are going to be in that industry and will help with the growth of that industry. And that's where I'm looking at, I think. And that's something definitely to keep an eye out.
Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, that's a word of the wise, if you will. So, I mean, again, obviously, not this podcast is not a financial advice in any way. It is just conversations around what we're thinking and what we're talking about. So please always do your own research to that effect. But yeah, no, that's brilliant. Muhammad, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute privilege to have you. I've learned so much from you today, and I hope our brothers and sisters who are listening to this over the coming days, weeks, and months, or years, or whatever it is, found this very helpful and very useful. Please be sure to join our X, our Discord, our Telegram, and I'm sure Brother Muhammad's details will also be available for you to check out. And just sort of imparting, Brother Muhammad, is there anything you'd like to say to the people who are listening in conclusion remarks?
What I would say is do the research and start investing. Don't hold back. Don't sit and do nothing. I think take whatever steps you need to get yourself on that journey. Even if it doesn't necessarily mean start investing straight away, but look into the industry, look into the investments, look at what options are available, and then get started when you're ready. But do the research now.
Absolutely. What a beautiful way to end the podcast. I think the watchword here is education. And I think that's important. As Muslims, we are required to know why we do things. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why am I investing? Is it safe? Is it a good idea? You're required to understand the risks and the benefits of what you're doing and to make an informed decision on that effect. And it brings us back to this concept of education. You don't necessarily have to make a move, but at least educate yourself, prepare yourself so you can either say yes or no in an educated manner. So I think that's brilliant. On that note, as I said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been an absolute privilege to host with Brother Muhammed Lamabt from Muslim Investing. And I hope to hear from you soon, inshallah. Make sure you reach out to us, leave us a comment, a like, a share. If you have any questions, please do write out to us, as I said, on Telegram, Discord, or our X account, and we'll be more than happy to discuss with you. On that note, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.